Please give a warm welcome to writer, director, the incomparable Emerald Fennell.
Thank you. It's very kind.
Thanks for being here, Emerald.
Of course.
Awesome. First question, when I introduced the film, I talked to them about the voyeuristic aspect of the film, and I told them that the aspect ratio that you change emphasizes the voyeuristic aspect. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, of course. Well, I think it became apparent quite quickly when we went to the house. It's so square. And it felt that the things that are what's so fascinating about it is that the ceiling is just as ornate as everything else, you know, the thing that nobody ever looks at. And so it seems sort of important that we kind of framed the house in the way it was sort of almost meant to be framed. And then a lot of me and Linus's, a lot of our references for this film were paintings, so, you know, Caravaggio and Joshua Reynolds, Gainsborough, and it just so happened that they were mostly portraits and they mostly had that kind of formal framing. But we were very keen to, you know, if we were going to use the 133, what we really wanted to do was make sure that we had, you know, if we had a kind of Caravaggio-esque setup, like the karaoke scene, you know, we made sure that it was side-lit by the fire, but also by a blue, cheap karaoke light. So you kind of have that sense of the sort of modern world colliding with the old one. And yeah, it also helps. Two of our actors are 6'5", so we didn't want to be cutting anyone's heads off. But
you also studied, I mean, this film recalls Hitchcock, all these sort of voyeuristic films.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the houses themselves, what's so wonderful about the kind of, I think, like British Gothic tradition of these houses, you know, when you think of Brideshead or Mandalay or any of them, they're characters and you kind of have to treat them like that. And what's fascinating about those houses is that they invite voyeurism because the servants need to be able to see you even if you can't see them because they clean the rooms or fix the mirrors the moment you leave. And so what happens is every room has mirrors and mirrors and mirrors and multiple entrances and exits, often hidden, for people to slip in and out, and all those enfilades, so you can kind of see right through. And it felt completely necessary to kind of have that constantly sort of ingrained in the making of the film, using windows, mirrors, all of that.
You brought up Caravaggio, the chiaroscuro composition, the darks and the lights. You and Linus went with that. Can you talk about that richness of the darks and the lights and the contrast?
Absolutely. I mean, it was so exciting talking to Linus for the first time because he, kind of like me, has a real kind of obsession with beauty. And obviously this film is about being obsessive about beauty, but it's very important to him and to me that everything has an emotional, you know, justification, every camera move, every framing. It's not just that it has to be beautiful, it has to kind of come from a psychological place. And so that was every decision we made, whether it was, you know, where to place the camera, when to move it, how. And even, you know, for me, it's sort of talking to the art department about, you know, not just the color of curtains, but the texture and way light hits velvet versus moire silk. And, you know, if we're making there's the scene where we sort of push through Felix and one of his girlfriends in Oxford and reveal Oliver's sort of glowing cigarette end. And that was lit entirely by kind of practical lights in a very sort of, kind of old-fashioned way with red velvet curtains and all of that. And there we created this kind of frame of a still life with all of these sort of glinting kind of objects that I suppose in the olden days would have been like pewter goblets, but these are all just old bits of rubbish and Red Bull cans and kind of screwed up chip packets. And so it's kind of always about the kind of the ugliness and the kind of sort of, I don't know, the kind of realness of human life, but from afar looks kind of beautiful and ancient, but it's sort of all
You brought up color. Your colors are so rich, you know, in particular the color red. In the two boys' bedroom, it's this, you know, violent red and greens. You know, talk about that. And with the chiaroscuro lighting, the color becomes repugnant at times, attractive.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I think what's so amazing about shooting on film is you just do get a kind of depth that you sort of can't really get maybe yet with digital. And what we tried to do as much as we could is just do everything in camera. So the grade was a very light touch. We tried to kind of interfere as little as possible. So it was really, really about kind of seeing it with our eyes on the day and feeling how it felt. And then, of course, because this is in many ways like, you know, I kind of like to say froths up against Merchant Ivory and Peter Greenaway and you know, Joseph Losey, all of those kind of the people who were making these British Gothic romances. And so their colour palette tends to be sort of quite intense. But also for me, it's a film about men. And so it needed to kind of have the sort of grain of oak and the kind of texture of skin. And, you know, it felt, and you know, all the enfilades in their bedroom, they're painted this kind of red lacquer, which, you know, some might argue is a very unsubtle visual metaphor of a sort of red passage.
We sort of alluded to it, but I want to talk about this. Watching your film, there's so much beauty in it, but at the same time, we're repulsed with it at the same time, and that conflict, that tug of war. And I know it ties with what the movie's all about us wanting things, and then the repulsion that we also get from wanting things. But it must have been so hard, production design, to carry that theme throughout the film.
Well, I think what's really wonderful is when you're kind of assembling everyone together, and cast and crew, you're looking for kindred spirits. You're looking for, you know, so Susie Davis, the amazing production designer, when she, you know, I spoke with so many amazing people, but she was the only person who said, yes, it's all beautiful, but the ashtrays are going to be full. You know, and that there's going to be dog hair. You know, there isn't, of course, because Elspeth Catton, we realised, would hate animals, find them utterly pointless, because she's sort of, you know, she's sort of monstrous and terrifying and wonderful. But sort of Susie wanted to see that kind of texture, you know, and same with costume. It was about finding not just the kind of we were getting sort of wonderful like archive pieces from Christopher Kane's first show, because they would all have been in that kind of world too. And so there was that side of things, but then it's also like the awfulness of the double, you know, the boys who are wearing two polo shirts on top of one another with both collars popped and a Livestrong bracelet, you know, and it's kind of those details, the kind of human details, but also that kind of constant kind of, you know, we're always, all of us, kind of walking this line between horror and comedy and the absurd, you know, and there's so much about this film that is kind of chilling but also absurd, and it's as you say, it's a film about desire. And I think that in our most private moments, desire is not very beautiful. I mean, it might be very sexy, but it's not picturesque, you know, it's quite carnal. I mean, it is carnal. And so I think, you know, it felt like the whole movie had to look and smell like that.
You brought up the costumes that are absolutely brilliant, and in particular, I was fascinated with Barry's costumes, that he evolves, and he tries to dress up like they do, but he's always off kilter, like not quite there. How did you guys calibrate that evolution?
Really hard as well, because he's sort of, it's a double lie always with Oliver, because he's, you know, pretending to be a kind of working class boy from a very troubled background when actually he's a middle class boy with very loving parents, which is the most deadly thing if you want to be special or interesting. And so it was always that double thing of, what is the lie also? But we kind of realised that for Oliver, who's such an astute observer of people and what they notice, we thought, well, actually, what he's kind of assumed is that he, as his character, Oliver, would be sort of trying to look a little bit, would be wearing kind of button-up shirts when everyone else was wearing big kind of moth-eaten jumpers. It was that kind of, so it's endlessly complicated in its all character. But we had the little wheelie suitcase that he wheels up tragically to the gates of Saltburn, and so we kind of reused a lot of the same clothes. And, he's only ever really comfortable in black tie. Mm-hmm. You see, that's when or naked, of course, when he's in his own clothes with the feel of his own home, I think he's a bit more uncomfortable.
You brought up nudity. In the film, when it comes to the sex scenes, the nudity is implied. We think we see what we saw, but at the end, the nudity is not about sex. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think it was really important. This film is, in many ways about sex. But I think the thing that's wonderful is that, you in almost all of the sex scenes, whether they're solitary or not, we never really see below the collarbone. Mm-hmm. But they're so filthy. And I think there's something, that's the thing. It's like it's the Gothic. It's the thing that we know is happening or we feel is happening. We don't need to see it. But I felt like the nudity is about grief or triumph. It's a sort of different animal instinct, I think. And it felt like if we'd used a copious amount of nudity in the sex scenes, it would have been kind of uninteresting and relentless. And it's not real too. Mm-hmm. It's not real with those scenes a lot of the time, which puts you in a bit of an uncomfortable position. And so, but when it's just someone on their own and it's just their face, it feels very, very real.
Yeah. Speaking of Barry, his performance is phenomenal, and there's so many layers to this character, and we don't fully understand everything that he does until the full reveal at the end. How, writing-wise, tell us about the challenge of writing this performance that, the layers are slowly revealed and they're not what we think they are. And as a performer also, the difficulty of tackling that complexity.
Absolutely, and what we tended to do was shoot things. We would shoot every scene twice, or at least twice. One with. But
when you shot it twice, was it for the purpose of the film, or
yes.
just?
Well, yes. Well, I mean, what I mean is that it required two performances. It required the real Oliver and the not real Oliver, depending on who was looking at him, I suppose. So we had to. So there was always this balance, and then sometimes we didn't use it in the film in the end, but sometimes in his fantasies he was Felix and Felix was him as a kind of entwinement. So it's like anything. It's you shoot it and it's in the script, all of these things. But you also kind of once you have the material, it's then at that kind of you then have to decide at what point you sort of reveal and when you don't. I mean, I always felt with this film that the only kind of twist, if such a thing is possible, that I was really desperate to preserve was Oliver's family. Mm. And that after that lie, I think we know.
But walk me through, I'm so curious about the fact that you shot it in two different ways. Was it your purpose that eventually in editing you would grab
we did. We did. I mean, a lot of the time it's kind of about what you show, in the, that for example, in the film, there's a moment when his phone rings, the sick in the sink, which obviously is quite, But the purpose of the sick in the sink is it's so disgusting and shocking that the hope is it sort of slightly hides the sleight of hand, which is he picks up his phone to his mother and all he says is "Mum," and then he goes straight to Felix and says his father's dead, and so we make that kind of connect. Hopefully, we make the connection. We forget we haven't actually seen the phone call, and that it's just in hindsight we realize it's just a completely ordinary.
But I'm not. I don't know enough about acting. How mind-boggling must have been for Barry to have to calibrate all this different realities. Was that a challenge for him?
I mean, I think really it's just about it's tuning up. It's the same. It's the same with every actor. It's in every scene. You you decide how much of something you're going to hold back and how much you're going to reveal. And so really it was just a matter of moderating in any given scene how overtly disdainful or angry or turned on he was. It was sort of and it's really something that he'd do anyway, I think. Yeah. Naturally.
Tell us about the house. Did you guys find that place? It's so amazing, the Baroque exterior. Did you guys all live there and shot there?
We didn't live there. We'd have killed each other. Yeah, it really would have been. I'd have Olivered. I'd really gone full Oliver. We looked very, very hard. The thing is about if you're making a film like this, which is sort of a take on this kind of film in many ways, it's quite difficult because of course we've exported this film so effectively internationally that every house in England has been filmed a million times. And what we really, really needed, what I felt we really needed was the feeling of peeping into something we'd never seen before. Like all of us as an audience having the privilege of like something that feels, sort of the door within the door. That's what they were, the Brideshead thing. And so we just looked, everyone started looking kind of far outside of London, because everything had been used or converted into a hotel, things like that. And then, and then somebody put us in touch with somebody who worked at the house. And it had never been filmed in, never been photographed even. And it was just, it was just about talking. The moment I went, I think they were sort of intrigued. And then the moment I went, I just thought, it has to be. Because also so much of the structure is all of these kind of one-ers, Oliver's triumphant dance at the end is the inverse of Felix's tour. It's, I didn't want to be cheating, and I hate moving location. It's so tedious, and it's so wasteful of both time and money, and also you don't have that feeling that we needed, which was everyone, in one place, kind of in a summer. But it was just about kind of talking to them about the film, and it was like everything in this film, an enormous amount of trust, so that they knew that we weren't going to treat it like a lot of crews treat the locations, which is kind of by like riding roughshod over it. So but it's amazing.
The house is another character in the film, and I love the maze. Was that there, or is something that you guys had to build?
The maze is sort of both there and not there. There were parts of there was a sort of funny, almost middle of the maze in the house, but no, it's all made. We made it ourselves, but I felt very strongly that if we're not, it needed to be a real maze, which sounds really demented. This is when everyone who works with me wants to murder me, because I just felt like what I didn't want to see in that top shot was kind of just whatever sort of CGI assembly that could be had. It was so me and Susie Davis both read the same interview in the New Yorker at exactly the same time and texted each other at the same time. A man called Adrian Fisher, who is the world's most famous maze designer, possibly only maze designer, and He does all of the mazes. He does all the mazes for these country houses. He does mazes for games. You know, he's like really extraordinary. And so we got hold of him. We said, look, we're going to have to build this maze, but we want it to be a practical maze. We want it to be doable. You know, so even if they're called finger mazes, even if you just do it yourself. And so I said, you know, I had, obviously he's the expert, but I said, if we're going to do it, if we're going to have the Saltburn maze, I'd really like that there's, my only kind of asks would be that there are two ways of getting to the centre. The first is that it's the hardest maze you've ever designed. That's almost impossible. And then the other route is just the cheats route, and it's just straight through. Oh. And so we've got it, and it made it feel real. You know, all the Minotaurs are based on Barry's body. So we kind of made these huge statues, but all of them have his kind of amazing stance. So it's kind of an endless cornucopia of fun.
Which leads me to the extraordinary set piece, the Midsummer Night's Party. I want to watch it on repeat. All the details, from the costumes to the set design, walk us through creating that set piece.
Oh man, it was just, everyone just did so well. It was crazy. And we only had 2 nights to film it. And there was so much to film. And we had 300 essays, all of them wearing, I mean, you know, the attention to detail again, it was just like the combination of kind of classic Halloween smart costumes, you know, $19.99 costumes, and then the beautiful things. Everyone had this kind of like twist, some interesting twist. And then, yeah, it was just about keeping everyone. The thing about parties in films, or even nightclubs in films, I always feel that they always seem kind of boring. There's always a sense that maybe the floor's too clean. That do you know? Or people are just dancing to some temp music, and they'll just pop something over it later. So it was really important to us to just keep, like, you know, we played music. We played my 2007 summer playlist. All night, kind of keeping people going, and then it was just about kind of finding as much detail, shooting as much as we could. It was, I mean, everyone was amazing because we finished every morning at 6:30 a.m. and it felt like we'd all been at a party after a while. Yeah.
Tell us about the specificity of the time period. It's 15 years ago. I don't want to put words in your mouth, the importance of that time period.
Well, I think, you know, it was because of the structure of these, the structure of this kind of Gothic novel or film is that you have a man, usually a young man, looking back over a moment in his life that kind of destroyed it, that he could kind of never get over. And so I always knew that we'd have this framing narrative, and not know, obviously, till the end that he's talking to Elspeth. But that we'd have this framing narrative in it, so it meant it would always need to be set in the recent past. And 2007 was when I was at university, so I felt, you know, that I could kind of really lean into the detail. But also it's the time when it's not come around yet in fashion, so everyone still looks kind of crap. And it was really important to kind of humanize these beautiful people in this extraordinary house, you know, and whether it's Oxford or Saltburn, these timeless places. If you set it now, we don't know our own trends. We don't know what sort of, we're not far enough away. 15 years is the perfect amount to see what we're, you know, if you're making a satire up to a point, or like a comedy of manners, you need a little tiny bit of distance to be like, oh, of course he wears, you know, the Livestrong bracelet. Of course he has a Carpe Diem tattoo. You know, of course she's the richest girl in England, but her fake tan is by Saint-Tropez, and it's all grubby around her hands. You know, that it just makes you think, like, it reminds you all the time that everything is, all of these places, the humans that live in them are kind of completely impermanent. You know, and the structure is impossible to kind of get into, really.
Also, you were at the cusp of, you know, Twitter, Instagram. It was at the beginning, you know, it was about to start.
It was pre all of that, and also I think we had a lot of discussions, because I think at that point, Facebook existed at Yale and Harvard and Oxford and Cambridge, so it was that kind of weird time where everyone thought it was still a sort of university thing. And so we did, you know, there were conversations about maybe the Facebook of it all, but, you know, it didn't feel, it's not very compelling, you know, narratively. Somebody just looking at their computer. I mean, in many ways, this film is about me looking at my computer. And it's about me looking on Instagram and looking at magazines and people and watching. But it would not make for an interesting film. So it's sort of about, you know, making that watching a little bit more, real, compelling.
Yeah, and tell us about the music, in particular the music, the needle drops in the film. That to me they counter the beauty that we see. They accentuate the naughtiness.
Yeah, I think it's a sort of similar thing, isn't it? It's same as sort of having The Ring and Superbad. You know, it's also the texture of the world. And I think for me, I can't, you know, we all live so much in the world. Our references are constant, movies and, you know, so it sort of always feels odd to me to kind of make a film divorced from people listening to music and watching films and all those sorts of things. But of course, like all of that, the sort of indie, like rock of the time was so great because it's not really perennial in the same way. A lot of those bands, for whatever reason, didn't kind of outlive the era, which is sort of quite important thing for it to sort of be preserved in aspect. And the only song that we have that kind of really did, which is, you know, Mr. Brightside, because of course it had to be in there. We don't actually hear it, we just hear them singing it from really far away in the car. And it was the most expensive cue by miles. And obviously the producer's like, do you want to play it? Do you want to maybe put it somewhere? Do you want to maybe put it somewhere a bit more prominent? But for me, it was just about that thing of, you know, it's just part of, I don't know, it's just part of your life. But all of that music is so, you know, it's just so brilliant and so fun. And it's so particular. And I'm very scrupulous. I don't put any temp music at all, including score, on at least the first you know, good 4 or 5 assemblies, because I just think it needs to work without it. Because otherwise it's so easy, of course, to just put like Paris Hilton's Stars Are Blind on something and make it wonderful. But it's, you know, it's true. It's like it gives you so much music that you've got to be very careful about how you use it. And, you know, and Anthony's score is so incredible. And Anthony's score is all based on what was written in the script and what was paced out in the script, and then on the day was the opening was always set to Zadok the Priest, because it's the coronation hymn, and you know it's a film about a coronation. And when you listen to it, they sing Oliver Quick. They don't sing Zadok the Priest, but no one ever notices. And Anthony's score was born out of Zadok the Priest, so it was born out of that, and then it becomes it again in the end. So it's, you know, it's just all that detail. It's just so much fun. It's so amazing.
Your film, hearing you speak, there's so much detail. There's so much thought you've put behind everything, from costumes to, I mean, in the dining room, you see this crazy color candles. Your obsession with detail is amazing. Is that something that you enjoy, just obsessing on all and everything?
Some would call it oppressive. I mean, I think it's partly because the way that I write is that I live in the world for years and years and years in my head, and I'm a daydreamer, so which sounds so twee, but I've realised it's sort of the only way that I work. And so for 7-8 years I've been in Saltburn, going into those rooms, having those conversations. There are other rooms and other conversations that didn't go in the end, and characters that fell by the wayside over the course of the years. And then, but the thing is then you're able to really, you add detail every time, you know. So it means that by the time you get there, you can, it's, of course, it's just such a pleasure, because if it's going to be on film, everything is character.
Yeah.
Everything is specific. There has to be a reason. Even if that reason is just to say, oh, these people have been talking at the pub for hours, so there would be stuff all over the table, not just kind of a few empty glasses, but like bits of chewing gum in old receipts and, you know, crumbs, and just it's the kind of stuff that gets overlooked all the time that I kind of am obsessed with. Or roots in women's hair. Everyone always has a fresh dye job in movies. And I'm just like, I mean, hello, it's just not doable.
Correct.
So,
but,
you know.
but I love, which is what I tell my students over and over again, that every detail that you put in the movie links you back to what you're trying to say, to the content, to the theme of the movie, correct?
Totally. And that's what's so wonderful, is that, you know, the kind of films that I like to make are kind of more expressive. You know, they're not purely literal, and Promising a Woman wasn't either. You know, they are real. They are about. They come from a place that I hope is, if I'm preoccupied with honesty, I suppose it's like an emotional honesty. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean it has to be, that a film has to just be strictly, perfectly like life, I suppose. In the same way that that the novels that I enjoy are kind of stylistically unusual or not strictly real. You know, it's a sort of funny. Yeah, it's a funny thing. And then if you make that world, then you have to just make sure that the details, that everything adds up to the sum of its parts, if that makes sense.
No, of course it does. I love to hear you talk about the title. Saltburn is delicious. It captures the film so perfectly. But I'd love to hear your take on Saltburn.
Thank you. It's a town in England that's nowhere near where we filmed this. But what happens in England is, of course, these houses own towns, you know, these families own towns miles away that are just named after them. But I heard it, I think maybe we'd been there on holiday or visited when I was a child. And so I've always thought of it, and it just struck me as, it sort of sounds like a sex injury. There's something it's sort of so tactile and pleasurable. And so I kind of wanted the house. And, you know, me and Linus talked all the time about shooting the house as a fetish object. And we did, you know, and Saltburn, I don't know, it's just compelling, isn't it? For some reason.
And then last question, you hit it out of the ballpark with Promising Young Woman. Were you concerned about the sophomore project?
I mean, you know, the thing is that and it sounds, again, I always sound so like a little Girl Scout. I just love making things. I really love it, and it's a huge pleasure and honor for me to do it. And so I love it. I really, really love this film, and it does all the things that I suppose I wanted it to do, and we who made it wanted it to do, and therefore, you know, you sort of can't worry. You can only connect with the people you connect with, and you can't really worry about the rest of it. And so I was just so grateful that Promising a Woman reached so many people, and it meant that I could make something else, and hopefully after this, something else, because it's just, that's the joy, is making things that, even if it's just one person who comes up to you afterwards, like a woman came up to me last night and said, I feel like you've reached inside me and rummaged around my body. And I was like, thank you. You're welcome. But that's, you know, that's the hope. That's the hope that I get when I go to the movies. So, yeah.
It shows, and you're absolutely brilliant, and I can't wait to see what you come up next. And thank you so much for coming to us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for staying to
You're
listen.
awesome. Thank you, everybody.